Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. We have a very special guest today, a three-time Bram Stoker Award-winning author. Yes, 3 times. Sarah Langan has won the Bram Stoker Award, and she has a new novel called Good Neighbors, which I admit is the first of her work that I've read, and it blew me away. So I was really excited when she agreed to come on and talk about Good Neighbors, which is going to be our primary focus, but we're gonna get you caught up on who Sarah is and how she got to this point. Sarah, welcome to Postcards from a Dying World.
David, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for reading the book, and this is a treat. So
yeah, I'm really interested in where I have to ask everybody, and I know I've had Norman Spinrad told me it was a stupid question when I asked him, but how did you get into genre fiction and to writing specifically? Because I feel like we always have to have that kind of baseline first.
I don't think I ever saw it as genre. You know, it was just a story I wanted to tell. And the stories that I loved, I mean, even the classics, a lot of them are horror or genre. Even like I loved Edith Wharton, and Ethan Frome is like a soapy political, I don't know. I would not like what's considered traditional literary is kind of boring to me. So I liked having plots, and that was interesting. But I don't know what got me into genre like science fiction, horror, fantasy. I think I just loved it as a kid. And I think that the things I'm interested in, the sort of moral complexities of modern life, are best told with metaphor. So that's what I was always drawn to.
Did you have any early authors that were your touchstones, or the ones that really gravitated you to the idea of storytelling itself?
So I, as a kid, I think the first books that I really loved were called the Dory books, and they were about Dory the witch, and she grew up in a coven, and she was raised by her mother, the witch. And my mom started reading them to me, and then they were the first books that I could read in like kindergarten and first grade, and I bought them for my daughters, and they're very, they're great. And then, as sort of always the stock answer is like, yeah, I read Stephen King, I read John Saul, I read Dean Koontz, then I read Dance Macabre, so I read Shirley Jackson, and all of those fun genre touchstones. I think adolescence is the best time to read those stories because they really kick into your sense of injustice and they just take hold. And I'm so glad that I had that instead of some kind of like pseudo romance story that made me feel bad about myself. Like instead I got to be exposed to stuff about the world that made me feel like I had power and agency and control, and I could affect change, which, the Twilight Zone, which we were talking about, all of those stories are so much about looking at the world around you and with a new lens and trying to make things better and seeing what's wrong.
And you grew up in Long Island, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm always interested too in what the geography of the places that people grew up in and how that they feel like that the communities that they grew up in affected them as writers and kind of helped, mold the clay.
So my town was called Garden City. It's where Good Neighbors is sort of very, very loosely based on, which is the town there is also called Garden City. And the town was very old fashioned. It was very much like a throwback where a lot of moms stayed home and raised kids, and a lot of the dads worked and they commuted on a train. And watching Mad Men it kind of felt like one of those towns, except it was the 80s. It wasn't the 60s. So there was something very strange about it. Well, it was also like nice and safe, and it was also very homogenous, and it was oddly, it was racist, and it was classist, as suburban places can be. You know, they were sort of engineered to keep people out, not to keep people in. And I think there's something interesting about that.
So if Good Neighbors was influenced by this, did your hometown make it into any of your earlier works? No. So Good Neighbors is the first time, huh? Okay. Well, yeah, it seems like it's it's definitely a fertile ground for social commentary, and we'll get more into Good Neighbors as it comes. But you sold your first story while in college. Did you? How long did you have the dream of being a writer before you sold that first story, or did this story just kind of happen first?
Oh, I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 4, and I never changed my mind.
Very early.
Yeah. I could just read, and I was like, this is it. I'm going to write these words that I'm reading. So, but the road to get there was long. I always wanted to do it, but I think I just was so afraid I wouldn't be good at it that I didn't try it. It was bizarre. So I read constantly, but I was so afraid of, like, I know so many people who wrote novels in high school and stuff, and I just, no way. But I went to college specifically for creative writing, and I went to a college that had a major in creative writing back when that didn't happen. And that was when I first started writing. And I knew, I was like, yep, turns out I'm pretty good, and I do like it. And I never stopped. I mean, I know some people, but I worked 2 hours a day from then on, at least. But at minimum, even no matter what day job was, whatever was going on.
Well, and was The Keeper your first novel or first attempt at a novel, or did you have a few trunk ones before you got to that one?
I think I wrote a short novel in college as my thesis. And then The Keeper, as soon as I started grad school, was my first novel. And that took, I started it when I was 21, and I sold it when I was 30. A long time. Yeah.
But it was an immediate success. I remember the buzz about it when it came out. And of course, was immediately in conversation with the Stoker Awards. And I believe you won with The Keeper. Was that for best first novel or just novel overall?
I don't think I did win.
Oh, you were just nominated? I thought you
was
won.
Nominated.
Okay, yeah. No, it was your second novel that you won for, right?
That was, for best novel. And then I won one for a short story, and then Audrey's Door, my third novel, won another Stoker.
Right. You won 3 years in a row, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was great.
So tell me about The Keeper and where that came from. And, the first novel is always a really important one. And it's one that you have to really believe in and know that that's one you're going to stick your neck out with. So where did The Keeper come from?
I think I just have always had a really strong sense of injustice. And so that story is very much about injustice, and it's about the harm of capitalism and patriarchy, only told as a ghost story, and told about this main character, Susan Marley, who's a takeoff on, A Christmas Carol, sort of haunting people with the complicit pact they've made to be a part of this society that doesn't support people who tend to fall through the cracks, and the way that it legitimizes people in authority, whether they deserve that authority or not. And so the premise is it's a dying paper mill town in Maine it's set over a period of, I think, a week, and it's raining the whole time. And all the things that have been buried come up in the flood. And this woman has died and she's resurrected. So it's a little bit of, I'm Catholic. So like I don't know what it is. Like I was raised Catholic. I'm like an atheist now, but I'm like, it's like something so deeply Catholic about everything I do that like, I'm like, of course my books sell in Italy. Like, they always sell in the Catholic countries or Spain. They're like, we love you. And I'm like, there's something weird about us. Like, like I'm writing some secret Catholic thing that I'm not aware of. But anyway, it's obviously like a female Jesus story too. So, yeah, I mean, I think I went to college in Maine and it's set in Maine, and Waterville was the town, and there was a lot of weird town gown relations. The money wasn't trickling through to the people in the town, and they kind of resented us a little bit, maybe justifiably. And then a lot of Maine is like that. You drive through and there's these dead paper mills everywhere. And that was the industry and what's left. So I was thinking about that too.
Yeah. And I remember when it came out too, that people were making the comparisons to Stephen King, but wanted to point out that it's not just because it takes place in Maine, right? But of course, Maine is King country. So it makes sense that since you went to college there, that you would write something that takes place there. But I'm sure I'm sure it was daunting also to write a supernatural story out of the gate in set in Maine. But you write what you know, right?
Yeah, I mean, it actually worked against me. It didn't work in my favor. That wasn't my best decision. I could have made it like Vermont. No, but it's nothing. He just has New England, and you can't send anything there. You can't. Right. Or it's like, this is about, just buy a Stephen King book instead. But no, I mean, the reason I said it there was because nobody wants to write about home specifically. It's too close. I'm in my 40s now and I could write about home. But before then,
you weren't ready to do that. No.
Yeah. Those towns like The Missing, it's Corpus Christi, Maine, and it's not. It's Long Island. It's so clearly Long Island when you read it that I just didn't want to say it was Long Island because I wasn't ready.
Gotcha. Well, Rick Hotchula was, wrote horror, and he was from Maine, and he set stuff in Maine too, before and after King, and he couldn't get away from it either.
Yeah. Everybody's like, he moved to Maine to do that. And it's like, no. There's other people.
Right. So let's talk about that experience of winning the Stoker 3 years in a row. So that kind of validation from the horror community, I'm sure really had to be like a powerful feeling, especially for someone who knew since 4 years old that she wanted to be a writer. So can you go a little bit deeper into, the feelings that you felt like going through that process of winning the award and getting that kind of recognition from the horror community?
So the horror community is really supportive, and they always have been, and it's been wonderful. And it's not just like this word community, it's just the individual people that I've gotten to know has been wonderful. And it's not just winning an award, it's like being in a relationship with people who are supportive and kind and fellow writers, and that I didn't think I would know my whole life. You show up at a convention, but I have, like, since I was in my late 20s, the same people I've stayed friends with, and they're my friends. And so more than the award, it's that. The award has been great. And I loved it. I'll tell you, like, with the third award, I was so glad to get it. But honestly, like, I couldn't go. I was home with a baby. And it's hard being a writer and having a family. I think harder for women to do. So it meant so much to me. And I wanted so much to be able to, like, pop out something else, for lack of a better expression, the next thing. But that was a time in my life when I couldn't. So, but those are my awards, and I'm so proud of them.
Yeah, I love
behind
that.
me.
Yeah, they're beautiful. And it's, I think one of the things that's great about, so, you know, this kind of recognition is that it's your peers that are saying, you know, good job, and you know, giving that kind of validation. It's great. And the horror community in particular, I know gets kind of a bad rap from the mainstream public because they don't realize how much kind of heart, soul, and good intention there is from the people who make it up, right? And
it's silly. It's the preconceptions people have about horror writers and horror fans. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it's always been, for me, it's always been a really great and supportive community. So I, you know, appreciate everything that the HWA has done for horror writers in general. But so Good Neighbors, let's get into this book. There was a couple years between the last one and this one?
Oh God, it was a decade.
Okay.
It was so long. It was
right.
Terrible. Yeah.
But it seems like, to me, just from the outside, The Good Neighbors is one of those books that it really feels lived in. It feels so well thought out, planned, and thought through. It seems like this is an iceberg novel that we're just seeing kind of the tip of it. And by that, I mean is that in between a lot of the chapters, you have maps of the neighborhood, and you have thought out who's in the neighborhood, who's not in the neighborhood. So I have a feeling that you did a lot of thinking about aspects that didn't actually make it into the final novel, that you know a lot more about Maple Street than we even saw on the page. Is that true?
I know more than anyone would ever want to know about Maple Street. Like, too much.
Well, I think that comes across, and it's one of the things that I think that makes the book good. But I guess maybe I skipped ahead a little bit. Let's talk about where the idea came from. Is this one that you've been thinking about for a long time, or did the idea come and then you just started rolling with it? Because I know some of my ideas I sit on for like a decade to 15 years before I write them.
I think the year after my second daughter, Frances, was born, I worked on this book, but I called it Empty Houses. Oh, no, you know what? It was going to be my next book after Audrey's Door, but then HarperCollins rejected it because Audrey's Door had sold so badly. And then I was like, I don't know where else to go, because my agent was like, no one else is going to take you. Your sales are so low. We have to like make you a romance novel with a nom de plume now. So I was like, no. And so I worked on this other book called The Clinic for 5 years every day. And it was a horror novel. And then my agent at the time was like, I hate this so much that I'm not talking to you anymore. And I was like, no. So I had to find another agent, Stacia Decker, who was like, I know you're good, but I don't know that I could sell this. And I was like, no, it's great. Because it's like, it's insane. It's like, who's the guy who did Starship Troopers? Like, what's his name?
Paul Verhoeven.
Paul Verhoeven. It's like if he wrote a long novel. Blah, bananas. Right. So that did not sell. And then I looked at all the rejections and what everyone had said about it. And then I went back to this old book, which was like I'd had a couple hundred pages of, called Empty Houses, and took all the notes. And the notes were, one, we don't really we pretend we want horror and that we like horror as editors, but actually we're terrified of horror. We hate horror. It just has to pretend to be horror and not actually be horror. There can't ever be something supernatural. We hate it, they just across the board. They don't like that. So, but that wasn't, I would have changed it anyway. But initially Empty Houses was, had like a monster and it was like this thing rising up and killing off the people on the block and sort of showing them for their hypocrisy. And truthfully, like it's like low hanging fruit. And I think I needed to write a good novel, like a really good novel, to get out of writer jail. And so I just went through edit after edit with my editors or my agent, Stacia, and sort of learned how to write in a different way than I'd ever written before, which was like telling the story that I wanted to tell with a different kind of metaphor, which was the sinkhole, which was sort of much more like, was it Passage to India? You know, where they're in the cave and what happened in the cave, and you don't know what happened in the cave, but it's responsible, like this kind of human terror of a boogeyman that doesn't exist is responsible for the death of this man in Passage to India. And I was kind of thinking about that. So
before we get real deep into Good Neighbors, you mentioned something that I think is really important lesson for all writers, but specifically for young writers, is let's talk about writer jail for a minute, because it's really important point that most people would think, hey, I got 3 Bram Stoker Awards, I made it, you know, I've got it, I shouldn't have to struggle. But, you know, there are times where writers who have had massive amounts of success or have visible amounts of success have to struggle with some other notions or other reasons why someone might not publish a thing. And for example, like it would be, I think most writers would think, oh, if I had 3 Bram Stoker Awards, I wouldn't have anything to worry about. I'd just be able to publish whatever I want. And so what you're saying is really interesting, because you know, you were struggling to get this book out, and it's really cool that it did. And it's interesting to look at how you try different things along that path. I don't know. I don't know where my question is, but I just want to point out that that's a really important point that you made.
I think it's important to just know. And I think it's important to just take it, because like everyone will always be in writer jail. Like you cannot have a career and not go through writer. Like you will, if you have a career, you will go through writer jail, probably more than once, because as soon as the sales go down and then the next book sales go down, you might have to work with another publisher. You might, there's always gonna, and you just have to be aware of that. And you just have to think that through, and you have to decide, like, what should my next book be that is telling the story that I want to tell in the best way that I can, and also addressing these very important market demands. And you have to think of that, because if you want to be part of the cultural conversation, that's the game.
Right. And you know, you had this struggle for a little bit, and you worked on one piece and then came out with this novel, which is great. And I think sometimes people might not realize that as hard as it was during that time, I'm sure a little bit of that struggle probably played into the quality or the hard work that you put specifically into Good Neighbors. And at least coming from my perspective as the reader who thought this book was incredible, and a 5-star book easily. I think now, knowing, I didn't know this when I read it, right? But now looking back on it, I can see where I can now kind of detect the determination in this book. You see what I'm saying? So,
I can. Like, it's like, I worked on that. I didn't mess around. And
and one of the things that's great about Good Neighbors is it resists genre distinction in many ways, because it can be defined in many, many different ways. But I think the main thing that I thought of when I read it was social satire, you know, and that yes, it's a horror novel. Yes, in many ways it's dystopic. In many ways it's cli-fi. In many ways it's a lot of different things. But social satire is one of those things that I just, you know, is the easiest, or horror social satire. So when you set out to write this book, obviously, I mean, you had to be thinking about the market a little bit in this. What market were you thinking about when you started putting together Good Neighbors?
I was thinking of, I knew that, so my problem has always been that the horror editors, the big ones, don't like my work because it eludes genre categorization even when it is horror, you know. Like it's like, but it's not the horror we thought, or it's not doing what was anticipated. So I've never been able to get the attention of the big horror editors, and it doesn't work for me to try. So I was like, I can't try to get those guys. So what I need to do is to find people who, like my first book, The Keeper, I wouldn't have called that horror, honestly, but it is. It's just, it's much more about society and culture and gender relations and the use of power. Only I used the format of a horror, of a ghost story, to tell it. So again, I couldn't have sold that to horror people. No horror people could, were like, what the hell is this? It was only like the literary, the pop, the what is it? Upmarket, whatever, liked it. So I was thinking about that. And then I was thinking about making sure there wasn't any supernatural in it, making sure that it would not be categorized as horror, because I don't sell as horror. But I do sell when they put a different label on it. And it's also like, I think legitimately a lot of women readers don't like horror. And it's because of the surprise rape that's always in them. It's like the shocking, like there's a huge thread of misogyny in horror literature.
My wife is agreeing with you off camera.
Yeah. So why would I want to be associated? It is horror, but I'm really happy not to be called horror, so that the women who are my audience, who are like a lot of moms like me dealing with Good Neighbors, with trying to raise a family and be a part of the world and having all these cultural ideas forced upon us. Like, that's my story. My story isn't that I'm trying to scare you. It's not, there's not a monster coming out of somewhere. And so if that categorization prevents an audience I really want to read my book from reading it, then I don't want that categorization, despite loving horror. But I don't love the horror that's misogynistic, and so much of it is.
Oh, certainly, I understand that. And I guess here, what I would like to try to do is make sure that the horror readers know that this is a book that they want to read, and that that it's one that they will enjoy. But let's get into some of the themes of this particular book. And one thing that's really interesting was I had wanted to read your work for a while, and when I read Good Neighbors, it was partially because it just happened to be at the library when I was checking out books, and I recognized your name, and I said, all right, well, I'm gonna start with Good Neighbors. And then I didn't know anything about it. I went in absolutely cold to this book. And one of the things that's interesting is that I've never lived in the suburbs. So the suburbs is never experience I've had. I've lived in college towns and big cities. And so I will admit, when I was maybe 20, 30 pages in, I thought to myself, well, I don't know if I'm going to get this or understand this as much as I want to, because I've never lived in the suburbs. However, that did not hurt my experience, because I felt like I was learning something about the suburbs by reading it. Can you tell us a little bit about what commenting on the suburbs, was that itself a motivating factor in this story for you?
So I feel like the suburbs, the idyllic Americana suburb, isn't really a suburb. It's representative of the American ideal. And it could be an apartment building. It could have been set anywhere. So just briefly, so people know, the story of Good Neighbors is near future. And this family, the Wilds, who are from East New York, Brooklyn, which is not a great place to live. And they have really troubled pasts. The wife is a beauty queen, but her stepmom pimped her out when she was growing up. And the husband, Arlo, is an ex-rock star who got addicted to heroin and is now off, but is sort of, his glory days are over. They have 2 kids and they are uneducated and kind of crass, but they're devoted to making their family work and to becoming better than what they had and giving their kids better than what they had. And so they've saved up all this money and they buy the most rundown house on a cul-de-sac on Long Island of an upper middle class town because they want to send their kids to the public schools that are good. And they want their kids to be exposed to these other kids. And they want their kids to go to college. And it's just this pie in the sky American dream that they have. And what happens is the neighbors are completely suspicious. And the neighbors are having problems of their own because this is near future America. Global warming has affected the country more and it's ruining infrastructure and people are worrying about their jobs. And so there's this sinkhole warning in the middle of the park that they're all they know something ominous is going to happen. Finally, it's going to pop and burst their protective bubble and infect their perfect idyllic suburban life too. Anyway, so the Wilds come along. They're viewed with suspicion. And then the next door neighbor, Rhea Schroeder, who is the main other character, I don't know, she's an antagonist, I can say that, has befriended Gertie, but they've had a falling out. And Rhea is the queen bee. And she immediately spreads horrible rumors about Gertie and tells people about Gertie's past that Gertie confided privately. And so now the neighbors all know the backstory of the Wilds and are appalled by them, just as the sinkhole opens. And then a girl falls down the sinkhole on the block. And people begin to wonder what happened and why it happened and why this girl was running. And they begin to blame the Wild family for it. And they think that maybe the Wilds were responsible. And it becomes this eerie game of telephone where half the block has moved away because these fumes are coming up because of the sinkhole. And the people who stay, it's because they can't afford to, or they've got an axe to grind. And they're waiting to see if Shelley or the girl who fell down the sinkhole is raised up. And in this time, more and more, their aggression and hostilities start to funnel towards the Wilds. And they start to scapegoat them and things get violent. And so that's the story.
But in one of my favorite parts, or a quote that I think kind of sums up a lot of what I understood to be suburban life, was in the book, you have a part where you said, if your life isn't perfect, you keep your mouth shut and you don't talk about it until it's perfect, and then you brag, right? So are there Langan neighbors who might not want to read this book? Are there neighbors of yours who maybe might find themselves in the pages of this, or are they more from where you grew up in Long Island? Is this a current or lifelong thing?
So growing up, like the town I grew up in was like that. And yeah, I would say it's more about what I grew up with. It was very much about appearances. And it was because we were so homogenous, which I think is very bad for community to all be the same. No one could be weird. No one could actually, and since everyone's weird, no one could be themselves. And it was just like an endless, everybody was wearing a mask. So it was that. But then I also, when I moved to Los Angeles, we live in a community called Laurel Canyon, and I've made a lot of good friends, and there's a lot to like about it, but it is LA. And appearances do matter. And the way that you talk matters. And being a New Yorker, like I'm constantly having to hold myself back because I come off as aggressive, because I'm so direct. And like someone will say like, did you like that movie? And I'll be like, nah, I thought it was a turd. And like everyone's like, it's like you can't talk like that. So there's these cultural rules that I really could relate to the wilds, because I don't understand them, and I don't wash my car ever. I don't really get why you're supposed to wash a car, but everyone in Los Angeles, especially my community, at least once a week. And I'm like, I don't know, but they have fancy cars. I drive a Honda, but why do you wash your car? I don't get it. It's like, and you have to go and it takes like an hour or 2 hours, like you drop it off. Like it's a long time in your life to spend on a car. So anyway, both, I guess.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, the sinkhole, one of the interesting things about the sinkhole is that, it's a buzzword thing. And speaking as somebody who wrote a novel that is is very intentionally cli-fi myself, that I was really excited when I saw those elements in the book. Now, it's not an overwhelming or massive part of the story, but it's really great how kind of subtle and perfect it's like kind of weaved into the story is how the sinkhole seems like something that maybe right now it's something that might happen in Florida or one of the warmer states. And the idea of this kind of thing happening in New York kind of adds kind of a social pressure to it. What was your thinking in bringing this element into the story? Because I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it, because I like that, and now knowing that you had originally kind of thought of it as a monster and kind of moved it more to this, it was a really smart narrative choice.
Thank you. I have a master's in environmental toxicology, and I studied global warming. And so it's on my mind all the time. And it's so clear that that's the future. And it's so clear it's a future we're not preparing for. And it's very clear that it's threatening to swallow our children. And we're not all going to die. Like the Armageddon's not going to happen. But there's a problem and we're blind to it. And so I was thinking of that. But I think there's always something we're blind to. Like if it's not global warming, it's something else. So in some ways, global warming is the stand-in for this thing that it's our obligation to come together on and work to solve for ourselves and for our futures and for our children. And as humans, we just tend to not like doing that.
Yeah, and I really appreciated the temperature, the slow temperature aspect of it, like kind of ratcheting up the tension was kind of important. And what we'll get into later is it's a really smart way of modernizing some of the themes that you're obviously paying homage to with the Twilight Zone. And so I guess we might as well get into that. So something that really bothered me when it's very clear that you are paying tribute to, with the name of the street being Maple Street, obviously paying tribute to the Twilight Zone episode, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. And one of the things it's, you put it into the chapter breaks, I believe, in the book. So I know it's there. It's not like you're trying to hide it, right? And I appreciated this. And what I thought was really cool about the climate change aspect is that it was a really smart way to modernize the issues that drove The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which was like the Cold War and communism, and that classic episode of the Twilight Zone. So in order to kind of tell your suburban microcosm version of this, it was just a really smart way to do that. So that is something that really impressed me on this. How funny was it to you that, because to me, I read 20 or so reviews of this book that no one mentioned the Twilight Zone one time until I did that I could see.
My heartbreaking news for you is that like people who are 30 and under have never seen the Twilight Zone.
I know.
They don't know. They're like, what? Oh, I don't know that, but I liked the book anyway.
Right. They don't know.
They have no idea. I'm like, you should watch it. And it's like, I'm an old person now. So you should watch it. It's good for you.
Well, very specifically, I watched that episode in a film class where they were talking about how to write social commentary. All right. So I thought maybe people were teaching that episode, but I guess that was when I was young. So
I wanted to get back to the sci-fi because I feel like I'm just
Absolutely.
it's not an exaggeration at all. Like, so since we've moved to Los Angeles, we've had to flee from fires every year. And last year was the worst. We had to leave for a week, and then we had to tape wherever our doors were open and put like air purifiers in when we came back because we couldn't stand living in a hotel during COVID. It was crazy, but that's global warming too. And then there was a sinkhole at the bottom of my block that came after I'd written the book. And the road was closed for 6 months while they had to do repairs on it. And it's like, oh, crap is falling apart right now. And everyone's like, it just happened. It's random. And it's like, this is not random. I used to ice skate on Hubble's Pond every year when I was little. And now it hasn't frozen since I was 15.
Right. Well, and look at what happened in Texas as well over the winter, right?
Yeah.
And well, you know, and it's hard for me because I had a specific my sci-fi novel is about wildfires. It's called Ring of Fire, and I had a nervous situation with Deadite, my publisher, because Jeff and I kept wondering, like, is it okay to look like, I didn't want to look like I was saying I told you so when all the wildfires are happening in Australia, for example, and when they're happening here and happening in Portland. And so, yeah, it's real stuff. So it makes your novel contemporary for sure.
But people don't even remember. They don't remember Australia. They don't even, it's like, so heat makes viruses and everything else replicate more often. Like there's COVID. It wasn't, I think there's a lot to blame on climate change. Like, so I think I think Ring of Fire, like people will be like, wait, was there a fire in Australia?
Yeah, right.
Are there fires in LA? Like oh gosh. And it's like, there is no Australia anymore. Did you not know that? People are like, oh, I forgot because it went past my Twitter stream too fast.
Oh yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's totally true. Yeah, and it is sad about the young people that they don't realize these things. But did you get any pushback from the editors on doing the very obvious homages to the Twilight Zone, or did they not even catch it?
No, they hadn't seen it, you know. So I told them, and they were like, "That's cool," you know. But
yeah, it's kind of neat. Well, you know, and it's a New York, you know, as a New Yorker, like Serling is, I know he was from further upstate, but it's a New York tradition too. I mean, he was a New Yorker transplanted to LA, and in many ways, if you listen to interviews with him, like he had that directness and that kind of played into like his persona, who he was, and this kind of stories he told. Yeah, it's well, you know, and I had said in my review of Good Neighbors that I thought that the sinkhole was as monstrous as any monster you could have come up with. I did not know that you had originally kind of worked on it originally as a monster. And so, you know, the novel deals with a mob mentality of conformists, suburban life in a really cool way. And you modernized it with the sci-fi issues. And that was really, really cool. But like, couldn't we say that, like, honestly, like the suburban mob mentality is a monster in itself, right? Like you feel like you're a target of a monster if you're living in it, I would assume. Like, maybe if somebody's like, oh, look, Sarah didn't wash her car again this week, right? You know, like, and then you're suddenly like, you know, the target of judgmental eyes, right? And that's kind of the idea of the mob mentality as a monster. Why hasn't I mean, I don't know, like there hasn't been as much suburban satire, I guess, lately that has gone to the full level of horror. So I think it's really cool that you did that. Are we going to get more suburban horror?
I have another book that I'm working on called tentatively Mom's Night Out, and it's the same vein. Like it's clearly the same Good Neighbors continuation. Yeah.
Awesome. My wife wanted to know if you're a fan of Alice Walker, by the way.
Well, I love the color purple, but I haven't read anything else.
Okay, so I think the reason why she wanted to know is because when you were talking about writing horror that's not classified as horror, the horror where that kind of confronts misogyny and all those kinds of things. I think why she was asking, because I think when you were talking about what horror means to you, I think she was thinking like, hey, she reminds me of you were reminding her of Alice Walker in that sense too.
I think there's a long history of women writing horror that's not classified as horror. Like Shirley Jackson and Alice Walker and Toni Morrison and Joyce Carol Oates and Margaret Atwood are all writing horror, but it's like it's mainstream and it's yeah. And I would that is exactly the company I want to be in.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of comparisons to Shirley Jackson with your work in general. I think now I described, Sarah Pinborough wrote a book last year called Dead to Her, that when I read it, one of the things I said about it was that it was stealthily feminist. And what I liked about Good Neighbors is I felt like it was also stealthily feminist. You know, you're not going to see Riot Girls selling it at their info tables, right? But there's so many ways that, you know, like this novel could not have been written by, as much as I see like the Rod Serling influence and the Rod Serling type of commentary in it, this novel couldn't have been written by a man, right? It has a very feminine touch to how it views the suburbs, and it's one of those things of when, for me as a cisgendered male reading it, I was glad to get the window into not just the suburbs, but into a perspective that wouldn't have been mine if I was living in the suburbs. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, thank you. The one thing is like, I don't think a man could have written it, because also like, and I was scared, this is what I was scared about when we sent it out, is Me Too was happening. I was completely in support of Me Too. And in essence, I'd written an anti-Me Too book, you know, like, and it's not that, but it's like, you could very easily read it and say, so there's a false accusation against a man for rape. That's the story. And it's like, oh my God. And it's a man's worst nightmare. And I kind of wanted to talk about that. And I wanted to talk about false accusations. And I wanted to talk about the tendency for people to attack. So that was important to me. And I think if a guy tried to get away with that, it'd be like, you don't get to write that story this year.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things too about the way Good Neighbors is structured, okay? So one of the things I really like about the writing of it is that you used the style of, you know, having the fake articles and the journal pieces and the different things that augmented the way the third person narrative goes. So what I really liked about it is that it set up kind of that Rashomon thing of where we're getting the viewpoint of the mob mentality, but we're also seeing the way history redefined this situation later, right?
Yeah.
And we're also getting so much of the we're getting some of the point of view of the mob, we're getting some of the point of view of the victims, and then we're getting the historical aspects. So how you divided up the narrative is again another really great narrative choice, and something that I was really impressed with on the writing. So how was that always a part of the process? Did you plan that from the outlining stages? Well, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm assuming you're an outliner, a planner, because this seems so well planned. But
Nope.
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 Okay.
Not remotely.
Yeah, I'm a religious outliner, so I sometimes put that on people when I went out of
No, I totally get it, but I can't, like, I love the discovery as I write, but then, so the problem is then I'm an editor, you know, so I edit for like 3 times longer, 4 times, 10 times longer than I spend writing something.
So was there a version of this book that was 100 to 200 pages longer?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, with many more characters. I cut so many characters out of the story. And I kind of realized I wanted something tight. And so I think I just threw everything away and decided to write something really tight, and had memorized the story at that point. So just typed it up, and then knew that the articles and like the primary source stuff was what I was going to use to comment on the story I was telling. Because I think you could read that, and if you don't have any of the newspaper articles and stuff, you're kind of like, what is the significance of the story that Sarah Langan has chosen to tell? Whereas I think once those articles are in there, you're kind of realizing I'm talking about social media and the ways that, you know, we're manipulated, and the ways that we're, you know, we don't investigate stories, and we believe everything we're told depending on what article we read.
Mm-hmm. And some of the smart choices of that too is that when you read the articles and the kind of the outside of the narrative parts, you also have to question how reliable the sources of information you're getting, because they sometimes contradict what you saw and within the actual narrative. So I just thought that was really neat, because it really kind of kept me a little off balance. And there were several times where I had the, and this is the greatest compliment I can give a writer. I had several of the, I saw what you did there moments with this book. And, but what was really neat for me too, is just, you know, like I said, it's one of those, I think I might've said this before we started recording, but this is one of those books that I really liked it while I was reading it. I really enjoyed it when I closed it. But when I started writing about the book and kind of trying to process my thoughts and feelings on it, I realized I liked it even more, because I was catching levels of the book that I didn't catch initially. And one of those levels was how the articles manipulated me as a reader, as a person consuming the story, and kind of like at some points pushed me in the right direction, sometimes in the wrong direction, but the right direction that you wanted me to go in, right, as the storyteller. And it's just top-notch storytelling. I was just really impressed. So but yeah, so can you tell me about getting into the voice of those? I mean, am I wrong that you were trying to move us in certain directions?
Oh yeah, I wanted to play with your expectations about what was going to happen, and then I wanted to play with your sympathy, because like if you know something's true and you have feelings for a certain character, and then I come in and write an article that's lying about them, you're pissed, and you're going to keep reading to be like, did somebody figure out that wasn't true, or does everyone believe this lie about this character that I know is innocent, or that I know like is a nice person? So I was playing with that. And I think that's a real life thing. Like if we had an omniscient point of view, if we had a God's eye view about all the things that are happening in the world, I think we would have very different perspectives on politics, on everything. So it's such a luxury to be able to write a God's eye view of a complex story. And hopefully I think that's really fun for a reader and satisfying to say, like, it could have gone this way. maybe when there's some misunderstanding or something horrible that happened in my own life, because so much of this book is about the ways that we as people react when we're triggered, when something really upsets us because of something from our past, and the mistakes that we make because of that we reproduce again and again and again. And I just wanted to write this book about that, about what does it look like from the outside? What's really happening when we behave that way? And then maybe we have a new insight, and maybe that feels good.
All right, so I want to know how Good Neighbors, and we're almost done, and I really appreciate your time, Sarah, because I just really love this book, and I love the insight into the process. I cannot believe.
I love that you're saying that. You're like, and I have another compliment. I'm like, this is like the best interview. Thank you.
Well, here's the thing.
Uh-oh.
Well, no, I really cannot believe that you wrote this without an outline. And I think I see now what you're saying about you probably wrote a much longer version and wheedled it down. Now it makes sense to me as a writer, but because I could tell that there was, and I know I said this earlier, but I think there was so much of the iceberg under the water with this novel. And I say that with the greatest compliment I can give, because I really believe that there's a lot for people to think on with this. And I hope that Good Neighbors will see translation into other media, because I think you could do really interesting things with this, especially in like a limited series format or something like that. So if you're listening to Hollywood, I think this novel has potential for that. But the Good Neighbors, like, I'm wondering how a lot of times when you write a book that you feel really good about, it can change the whole direction of like how you feel about storytelling in the future. Did you have any epiphany moments with Good Neighbors that maybe might be changing the path for your writing in the future? I don't know if does that make sense? I could see this as being a real like eye-opening experience to write, is what I'm saying.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. And thank you. I mean, that makes me feel so good. I like my book a lot too. And I you know, like, and it feels really good to have you say that, because it was sort of, I changed a lot emotionally since I wrote my last book. And I don't think the stories that I tell were catching up with the person I'd become. And I think when I wrote Good Neighbors, I figured out how to be the different kind of writer that mirrored the different kind of person that I now am. And there were a lot of tools I had to learn. And it was about like, how do you write a thriller? How do you write human interactions in this specific way? And I did so much more studying of like, I just studied so many different things to write this story. You wouldn't, you know, it doesn't look like it, but I studied narcissism, and I studied, you know, mob mentality and sort of Facebook and how things work. And it was fun. And yeah, I think I'm just a different writer than I was. Yeah.
Well, I can imagine your neighborhood growing up with having Facebook the way it is now would be a totally different animal too, and how the mob works and functions. But it seems like you covered it with your imagination pretty well. So what's coming up next for you mentioned the book you're working, Mom's Night Out, or
Yep, that's the next one. And then I'm also working on the adaptation of Good Neighbors for television.
Awesome. So see, that's why you got a big smile on your face when I was talking about it, because I think I can see how that would happen.
I think it would work that way. So I hope.
Yeah, in some ways it almost just makes really good sense that way. All right, so Sarah, I really appreciate your time and telling my listeners about Good Neighbors. It gives me a reason to really throw people at the book again, and giving me some insight that you know, in my mind, I was thinking I got to get horror readers reading this, right? And one thing that I feel differently about after having this conversation is that I got to get my peeps in the suburbs to read this, because I definitely have people. I know people that live in the suburbs, so I think that they'll appreciate this one too. And that's it's always and I like I do think that the stealth feminist horror is something that we need to be building up as a community and making sure that people are finding it. And not just by women named Sarah, but yes, you and Sarah Pimborough are both writing really good stuff. So two of my favorites now in this last year that I read. So Good Neighbors is a book that it's on hardcover from, and who's the publisher again?
Simon and Schuster.
Simon and Schuster, yeah. And I know it was on the new release shelves at the library where I pick up my books. So even in COVID times, they have like a shelf where they're like, hey, don't miss these, and they put it right by where people pick them up. And they had this on the shelf there, and that's how I originally found it. So I just really appreciate everyone spending some time listening to us. Sarah, is there anything else that you want to add before we go? Website, anything like that? Where can people find you?
SarahLangan.com, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the usuals. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reading Good Neighbors. I love the interview. I hope you have a good Sunday.
I appreciate it. Yeah, you make it easy when you have a really good book that has so many layers and things that I want to talk about. So, Sarah, thank you for coming on Postcards from a Dying World. And maybe when Mom's Night Out is in the world, we'll have you back.
I'd love to.
Or I got to dig deep into the catalog, because I definitely remember that The Keeper was on my radar when it came out, and I feel real bad I didn't get to it, because I remember reading all the themes on it that were coming out of it, and I remember because I was living in Portland at the time, and I remember the library in our neighborhood, they really pushed The Keeper like hardcore. It was always out on the staff picks shelf. So, and that says something, because Portland libraries are pretty serious. So, Sarah, thank you for your time, and we'll talk again someday. Okay.
Yay. Thank you.